Hey everyone, I'm Chris Carter of the Locked On Steelers podcast. Today, I take more of your questions from the mailbag, including, is this the year the Steelers set their new record on the all-time team sacks record? We'll talk about that and a lot more here on the Locked On Steelers podcast. Let's get into it.
You are Locked On Steelers, your daily Pittsburgh Steelers podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello and welcome to the Locked On Steelers podcast. I'm your host, Chris Carter, bringing you your daily dose of all things on the Pittsburgh Steelers. As always, you can find the show on your favorite podcasting apps and on YouTube. Like this video if you enjoy it. Subscribe to this YouTube channel to get all of your daily Monday through Friday episodes, as well as our bonus content. We thank you for making us your first listen every day because we're your team every day. And today's episode is brought to you by Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off your first purchase. Terms and conditions apply. All right, ladies and gentlemen, we got to get back into some mailbag questions here. It's a solo show today, just me, but still got a lot of good questions from you guys that I haven't been able to get to. I've kind of had to store in the background for a little bit while we've been getting through all the other content that's been coming out from the Steelers themselves. So let's get back into this, and let's get into a question from one of our longtime fans, Nate Glass, out from Los Angeles, California. Nate, take it away.
Hey, Chris, Big Nate from California. Just want to ask you two questions. Buy, sell, or hold version. And maybe you can share the questions on a upcoming episode with a guest. So the first question is, buy, sell, or hold. Will Mike Tomlin be the Steelers coach in 2025? Buy, sell, or hold. And the second question is, with the addition of Patrick Queen and with Cam Hayward coming back healthy and all the defensive weapons we have, will the Steelers break their sack record for a season this upcoming season? Buy, sell, or hold. Thanks for taking my call. Have a good day.
Thank you for your call, Nate Glass. Appreciate you always for reaching out to the show. As always, you can do like Nate Glass and call 412-223-6644. Leave your name, your question, and where you're from, and keep your question under a minute. And we'll try to get you on the show. But Nate, well, one of those questions is an easy buy because you asked that question before Mike Tomlin's got signed his 3-year extension, and now he has. And again, I apologize for not getting to you sooner so that question could be live and in the moment. But I would have told you the same thing then. Everything that I've heard around the team, everything was indicated Mike Tomlin was getting an extension. They liked what he would be able to how he'd be able to kind of hold off the Steelers from falling into a pit of despair while they were rebuilding and retooling and having to go through all the things they've gone through the last year. So that one's already answered. But let's get to the question that isn't answered and won't be answered until the end of this upcoming season, and that's whether or not these Pittsburgh Steelers will break their all-time leading team sack record. Now, let's go into what is their sack record, because some of you might be wondering, I don't know, sometime in the 70s when they set it. Actually, it was set just 4 years ago in 2020. Actually, it was tied, in 2020. It was originally set in 2017 when they got 56 sacks in both of those seasons, both of those also being 16-game seasons. You look at that and you think about what were the biggest factors in some of those years. Well, in 2020, biggest factor was TJ Watt was going berserk, and for the first half of the season, the Steelers offense was putting pressure on teams to have to at least try to be a little bit more aggressive, and that allowed the Steelers defense to kind of get after it, and they were able to get sacks, and they put together a really strong year. And in 2017, if you remember way back, that was TJ Watt's rookie season when he only had 8 sacks. Bud Dupree was coming into his prime. Cam Hayward was in his prime. Stephon Tuitt was playing well. Ryan Shazier was on fire until he unfortunately got injured. So there were a lot of things that worked for those teams there. But again, in 2017, what was the other thing you had on the side there? You still had the killer bees. You had one of the better offenses in the NFL. You had a group that was really getting after it. Now, to answer your question, I am buying that this team can break that record simply because I look at how this team is constructed and I compare it to those teams, and I think it has legs up on those teams. One, from 2017, TJ Watt is miles ahead of where he was as a rookie. 2020, I actually think he's better than when he was in 2020. TJ Watt has consistently got better. I also think that if you go back to both of those years, who was the guy across from TJ Watt in both those seasons? It was Bud Dupree. And listen, Bud Dupree, very good player once he found his footing with the Steelers. But I think that Alex Smith last year and will be this year is a better edge rusher than Bud Dupree was in his best years with the Steelers. I think the way that he gets after it, the way he's honed his craft, I think that Alex Highsmith is a problem for offensive tackles. And you combine those with Cam Hayward. Now, granted, Cam Hayward's the one piece of this puzzle that isn't as good as it was then, because now he's 35 years old. But I think Cam Hayward, like Nate was saying, can come back healthy and can make a difference. But it's not just those three that make the difference here. It's the overall composition of this defense, because I also think you got risers like Keanu Benton on the defensive line. I also think the addition of Patrick Queen is something the Steelers haven't had at the linebacker position, as is Payton Wilson, and I think Elandon Roberts another important piece there. I also think that this might be the most complete secondary we've seen from the Steelers in years, with the rise of Joey Porter Jr. If he continues to ascend the way that he looked like he was ascending last year, if Dante Jackson can get back to being the solid number 2 corner he was for the Panthers before they asked him to be the number 1, and if Cam Sutton can be a solid slot corner / additional defensive back, that's a deeper cornerback room than the Steelers that normally have in a lot of those seasons. And you go back to you go back to some of those years, and 2017 they were still starting Artie Burns, and things were rough at those times, and that's why that secondary was getting torched a lot. But also, you have Minkah Fitzpatrick with Deshaun Elliott, who arguably could be the best safety the Steelers have ever paired with Minkah Fitzpatrick out there. And you still have DeMonte KZ to work around in 3 safety sets, as well as Cameron Sutton to help there. So this is where I think that my buy answer comes to your question about this being the all-time sack record. One more game in the season. That's also important too, because I think they can get that. And for the record, they have also gotten 50. They have 56 sacks as the record. They've gotten 55 sacks 3 different times, once in 2021, once in 2001, and once in 1994. So that's, and it's also very impressive that some of those numbers there. But I think one factor to factor in, as well as we're talking about the defense, is the offense, because one thing that really helps a defense get sacks is when quarterbacks have to hold on to the ball, 1, because of coverage, and that's important. So the coverage aspect is important, but 2, because they need to throw deeper downfield, because they need to score more, because the offense is putting up points. And that's just something the Steelers haven't done for several years. And all we've been talking about on the offensive side of the ball is if Arthur Smith and Russell Wilson and his new offensive line and this new system can just be a middling offensive team, if they can just get to 16th overall in points, like just averaging 22, 23 points per game, and you want them to average more than that, but if they just get to that point, you're talking about a Steelers team that now can build leads on opponents and force them to have to try to catch up. And so when the defense is having a really strong game, it's not just 10 points that resets the game and makes this a close competition. It now might have to be 2 touchdowns, 17 points that another team has to get before the game's considered back in hand, and it's going to force teams to have to throw more, which allows TJ Watt, Alex Highsmith and company to pin their ears back, to be aggressive, and to go get the quarterback and get more sack opportunities. And that's the crazy part about this. Like, you think back to even 2020 when they got 56 sacks. Ben Roethlisberger, I said at the time, and if you were watching and listening to the show around then, I said at the time, I was like, listen, in the first half of the season, Ben Roethlisberger was cooking. He was figuring some things out, but eventually his body kind of gave way, and you saw that kind of dissipate in the second half of the season. If Russell Wilson can just do the first half of 2020 Ben Roethlisberger and make that consistent throughout this entire season, that alone makes this offense a lot better. Plus, you have a run game that I think is an offensive line, an offensive blocking game that can be better than what we've seen from the Steelers since maybe 2016, 2015, going that far back. And with Najee Harris and Jaylen Warren, you have a 1-2 punch there. You have Pat Freiermuth, you have George Pickens. If Calvin Austin and/or Roman Wilson emerge, there's a number of ways that the Steelers offense can, 1, score points, but also possess the football, and again, take away time from teams having the opportunity to be comfortable in games. Like, I think a perfect example, you go back and you look at the Steelers' second game against the Bengals. If you remember that game, and you remember the lead the Steelers built in that game and how they were able to get up really fast on them, and then even when Jake Browning hit that long touchdown to T. Higgins in the start of the second half, it didn't ultimately break the Steelers. It didn't really even scare them because it was 24-8. And I'm not saying it needs to be 24-point leads all the time for the Steelers, but that kind of stuff makes a difference. And that was a game where they sacked him 3 times, and you average 3 sacks throughout the season, you're doing pretty well. And that's not even including the games that you'll explode. So I think that's an example of if the Steelers offense can just be better, that's just as important as the defensive being better at times when it comes to these sack records. So, Nate, to answer your question, obviously buy on Mike Tomlin because it already happened, and I'm buying on the defense. But yeah, being a team that can break the all-time sack record at 56 sacks this season, and y'all can check me on that later. We got more questions for the mailbag here on the Locked On Steelers podcast. I'm your host, Chris Carter. Stick with us. We'll be right back. But first, I want to remind you this show is also brought to you by eBay Motors. Passion, drive, and patience. That's what brings home the winning trophy, and it's also what keeps your ride or die alive. eBay Motors has everything you need to maintain your vehicle and level it up to peak performance. From superchargers to roof racks, exhaust kits, LED headlights, and more. Whether you're into speed, power, or style, eBay Motors has got you covered. With over 122 million parts for your number one ride or die, you'll always find exactly what you're looking for. And with eBay's Guaranteed Fit, your part is guaranteed to fit your ride every time or your money back. Because with eBay Motors, you're burning rubber, not cash. With all the parts that you need and the prices that you want, it's easy to turn your car into the MVP and bring home that win. Keep your ride or die alive at ebaymotors.com. Eligible items only. Exclusions apply. eBay's Guaranteed Fit only available to U.S. customers. Back here on the Locked On Steelers podcast, I'm your host, Chris Carter. We continue with your questions in the Locked On Steelers mailbag, which you can always submit questions to by calling 412-223-6644. Leave your name, where your question, and keep your question under a minute, and leave you where you're from. We'll try to get you on the show here. We now switch it. We keep it on the defensive side. We're going to take a lot of defensive questions on the show today. We now switch it to Junebug out in Los Angeles, California. Junebug, take it away.
What's up, Chris Carter? This is Junebug, West Coast Junebug from Los Angeles, California, out on vacation in Mexico right now. Had a question for you about our linebackers. Payton Wilson and Patrick Queen. Do you foresee them being the two starters by the end of the season? Thanks. Love your show.
Thank you for the question, Junebug. I appreciate there. Again, 412-223-6644 to get your question in just like Junebug did. Junebug, let's answer your question. So the question is Payton Wilson starting with Patrick Queen? Well, we already know Patrick Queen not only is going to be starting, he's going to be a three-down linebacker. He's going to be the green dot wearer. He's going to be everything for the Steelers defense, very much quarterbacking the middle part of the defense. And I think that's going to be a major boost for what the Steelers need at that position there because they've been kind of doing it by committee over the past several years, and it hasn't helped the defense as much. And I think that's there. But I think that Payton Wilson, could he start by the end of the season? Sure, he could get there. But will he? I think is a tougher question because I am not overlooking Elandon Roberts. And Elandon Roberts was such a good player for the Pittsburgh Steelers. And I think it cannot be overstated how good of a player he was for the Steelers. I guess it can be overstated if you're crazy because you could say he's the greatest player of all time. But my point is with Elandon Roberts, he was spectacular in so many of the little things that he needed to do. And especially when the Steelers linebackers were decimated with injury, when they were pulling off guys off the practice squad, Michael Walker and guys you had never heard of, and Mark Robinson wasn't working out. He had to kind of hold it down and be the linebacker for the Steelers defense. And he was brought in really to be the number 2 guy behind Cole Holcomb and then a platoon guy with Quan Alexander when they acquired him. But when Cole Holcomb and Quan Alexander went down within a week of each other, Landon Roberts stepped up in a big way. And he was already stepping up before that, but he stepped up in a big way and he was hitting people at the line of scrimmage. He was calling out things. He was even making plays in coverage. And that was something he was also pointing out was like, y'all talk about me as not a cover linebacker, but I can do that too. And while you don't want him covering Amari Cooper or anything like that, you can get away with him helping in coverage against tight ends, covering running backs out of the backfield, having some drop zone coverages that to try to catch people off guard, but also in blitzing the quarterback. And that's where we get into where Nate was going with his question too, is that the linebackers also play an important role of getting to the quarterback because you have 3 guys and maybe even 4 guys if Holcomb comes back healthy who all can both stuff the run, help against the pass, and then go get the quarterback. And that's why I'm not so sure that Payton Wilson does start. Now, does he play significant snaps? Absolutely. But you don't have to start to play significant snaps at linebacker. Linebacker is a position where, especially in today's NFL, you want to keep fresh legs out there. You want to keep guys moving. You also are very matchup dependent when you have multiple types of linebackers. And with Payton Wilson, he's going to be a guy that we've already talked to him. He's talked about hey, I'm already the dime backer. I'm always being worked into these more pass friendly or pass attentive formations that the Steelers have to handle that. And that's where Payton Wilson's going to come in. And don't be mistaken. that's going to be very important. And I think within a year's time, he may become the starter after this season. But this season, I still think it's a Landon Roberts and it's Patrick Queen, particularly because the Steelers want to still be able to stuff the run. And I think that there's still a question about this, the interior of the Steelers defensive line, even with Cam Hayward's return. I think that there's still questions because Larry Ogunjobi was solid last year, but not spectacular. Keanu Benton was solid last year, but needs to grow and learn to finish plays more often. DeMarvin Leal wasn't solid last year, but is looking like he could be better this year. But those are all question marks. Those aren't guaranteed dominant performances. And so when you have that, having a guy like a Landon Roberts who can just play downhill and focus on that job, I think that'll help Landon Roberts be even better than he was if he and the other players in the Steelers can stay healthy, because then he can focus specifically on his role and not have to jump back and kind of play the Patrick Queen role that they're going to be asking of him. And whereas he was good in that role, I think Landon Roberts is specialized as a thumper, as an attacker, as a go and hit the running back type of dude, or fill the hole, take out the fullback, take out the pull-in guard, and clear up space for the guy behind you, or beat those guys and make the play yourself. And that's why I don't think that Payton Wilson will end up starting unless there's injuries and things like that right away. But that is not a knock on Payton Wilson, because as anyone who's watched or listened to this show over the past several months, I've been talking about Payton Wilson as one of the better players in this draft class. I ranked him in my top 50. I said that they should have gotten him. I thought they could have gotten him a lot earlier than they did, and they ended up getting him anyways in the late part of the third round. And I said that was an ultimate steal for them. I even had him as my best linebacker in this class. The only thing holding him back was his injuries in the past. So for me, Payton Wilson, I think that he's going to end up being a starter for the Steelers. But this season, I think that the starters will remain throughout the rest of the year, Patrick Queen and Landon Roberts. Where Payton Wilson goes from that will be determined on how well he progresses this season. But a great question from you, Junebug. We have another question here that we'll get to in a minute here on the Locked On Steelers podcast. I'm your host, Chris Carter. Stick with us. We'll be right back. Back here on the Locked On Steelers podcast, I'm your host, Chris Carter. We continue our show here on the Locked On Steelers podcast, taking your questions on the Locked On Steelers hotline that you can call into, or call in line that you can call. It's 412-223-6644 to get your question on the show. Remember to leave your name, where you're from, keep your question under a minute. We'll try to get you on the show. This question, we've had two questions from Los Angeles, so we got to switch it up. This one comes from Kansas City. Ryan asking a question here. Take it away, Ryan.
Hey, Chris. This is Ryan in Kansas City. I was just reading an article talking about Ryan Watts, and his role with the Steelers. Sounds like he's having a great spring, and hopefully he'll have a great spring camp. But my question was something about the article talking about a big nickel package that he might be able to be used in, and it sounds like 3 safeties. I was just curious what that was and how you think Ryan Watts would fill that role. That's it. Thanks for your time.
Thank you for your question, Ryan, here on the Locked On Steelers podcast. Again, if you want your question in like Ryan, 412-223-6644 to get your question on the show. But let's get into the answer here on Ryan Watts. So the big nickel is think less slot cornerback, think more free safety, because that's where Ryan Watts is being worked on right now. We've heard that could be the move before mini camp and rookie camp. And now we've gotten further confirmation that that's what they had him working on. And DeMonte KZ also confirmed that to me when I talked to him about what he's been able to provide. Now, you might be asking yourself, well, wait a second, Chris, why? The guy was a cornerback at Texas and he was in the college football playoff. Why would you move this guy around? Well, because his athletic profile does fit this, and I think could work very well. He doesn't have the straight line speed to keep up with the fastest corners, but he does have enough burst and athleticism to stop, change directions, and be a guy that works in the middle part of the field. I also think that he displays headiness at the level in secondary that could make him relevant. And I want to make this comparison to you as far as it goes to relative athletic scores. Now, if you remember relative athletic scores, when it comes to how they're used during the NBA season, or the NBA, excuse me, I'm doing the NFL, NBA draft coverage for Pitt guys like Bub Carrington and Blake Hinson. So talking draft right now can be very confusing. But by the way, go check out that coverage. I'm doing a lot of great work there. Talk to Bub Carrington and Blake Hinson. If you're interested about those guys, go read my work at the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette. A lot of great coverage there this week. I believe Bub Carrington goes top 20 tonight in the first round of the NBA draft. But back to the Steelers. Ryan Watts. If you go side by side with not Sean Elliott, not DeMonte KZ, but Minkah Fitzpatrick's relative athletic score, he actually scores higher as a safety in the relative athletic score system than Minkah Fitzpatrick. Now, part of it is because of his height and his weight. He's 6'2", almost 6'3". Minkah barely 6 foot. He's 208 to Minkah's 204. And so he does have some height advantages there. And Minkah does run faster than him. Minkah ran a 4.46 compared to Ryan Watts' 4.53. So there's that to it. But where Ryan Watts really tested well in the combine, and this is why I thought he was a really interesting super late round pick for the Steelers, because his athleticism brings you options here. He had a 40.5-inch vertical jump, which is very impressive, tested in the 9.6 range of relative athletic score, which means some of the best safety grades, best grades of the safety class. He also had an over 10-foot broad jump, which was an 8.38 relative athletic score. He also timed a 4.13 and a 6.82 in the shuttle, and a 6.82 in the three cone. All four of those being among the best, and I mean the best, in the green. When you're looking at relative athletic scores, you're thinking red means bad, yellow means okay, green means really good. He was green on all of those explosiveness and agility drills there, as well as his height and his weight. And that's where I think things could really work out for him. Also, his hand size, identical to Minkah Fitzpatrick, making him good for going up and getting the football. Arms a little bit longer, too. So that doesn't mean that he's going to be better than Minkah Fitzpatrick. Of course, Minkah Fitzpatrick, part of what makes Minkah Fitzpatrick is that he is a dog and he goes after it. His ways, approach game, his natural skills. He has so many of the things that Ryan Watts doesn't have in that department. But athletically, you look at Ryan Watts and you could think there's no pressure on him to play this year or next, unless the Steelers again get decimated with injuries, as they have been the last couple of years, because you remember the safety position was decimated by injuries and they had to deal with a lot. They had Patrick Peterson playing safety. So I mean, technically, if that happens, Ryan Watts could play. But let's say that all goes well and maybe only one injury happens in the safety room, and because of Cameron Sutton also helping back there, maybe all you need to see is Minkah Fitzpatrick, Deshaun Elliott, DeMonte KZ, Cam Sutton, and that's your safeties for the 2024 season. Well, then you get Ryan Watts a year of experience to learn behind those guys, learn the defense, understand his new role, and play into it. And then next year, maybe he gets a bigger role then. And now he has a little bit of experience. He hasn't been exposed by opposing offenses yet. He can build up his confidence, and then maybe he gets there. And a guy, again, 6'2", 208, who can move and change direction and explode on the ball and also go up and get the football. All those things, to me, look like good traits to have in a potential safety that you can develop. And again, that's a developmental project. That's not a he has to work to make the secondary work. If it doesn't work, it's like, oh, well, another super late round pick just didn't work out. Every team does that every year. But if it does work out, that's another safety that you don't have to pay a whole lot of money to, that you could add to your roster, and you could put him back there with Minkah Fitzpatrick and have him float around. And because of his size, I'd even say that, and this is where he could come into the eventual big nickel picture, where you could say, you know what, if he's good enough at the safety position, maybe instead of just being a free safety, he can be a strong safety. Maybe you can move him into the box and he can check wide receivers in the slot while also helping against tight ends, while also dropping back and being the deep cover guys to let Minkah Fitzpatrick kind of flip around a little bit. Because while you want Minkah Fitzpatrick being that deep center fielder most of the time, you also want to have the potential illusion of other players who can do that, so that if there's, or at least the other players who can hold it down, so that Minkah Fitzpatrick can disguise, hey, you think I'm playing this deep safety role, but really I'm coming up and playing robber in the intermediate level. And then that's how he gets a lot of interceptions. And in fact, that's how he's gotten a lot of interceptions in his career. Go back and look at how many times he's done that to the Bengals and the Browns. So all that being said, Ryan Watts isn't some key to unlock the future of the Steelers and make everything better, but he's another potential developmental piece that kind of complements what the Steelers have done at the position. And I think this is more credit to what Omar Khan has been able to do for the Steelers in the front office. He's gotten guys who are starters, like guys like Patrick Queen, guys like Russell Wilson. He's drafted guys like Broderick Jones, and they brought in guys that are going to be able to at least hold down these positions. So he drafted Joey Porter Jr. last year, and he looks like he's doing well. So you got your starters, but you also got your potential developmental pieces that look promising behind them. We just talked about Payton Wilson being one. We've talked about how DeMarvin Leal, though I think he was previous administration with Kevin Colbert, but we've talked about Keanu Benton and him coming up, and still there's Cam Hayward and Larry Ogunjobi there. We've talked about Corey Trice, him being that. Darius Rush, who was added this year in the middle of the season. So you have some answers there. There's all these different guys, and also Mason McCormick on the offensive line, who we've talked about, and Spencer Anderson, Dylan Cook, all offensive linemen who have potential to grow there, but there's not pressure on those guys to have to be the man right now, barring any serious injuries. And that's where I think Ryan Watts fits in, as one of the many younger Steelers who show promise, have athletic potential, could eventually fit into this role, but just need to develop. But there's also no pressure on them to have to develop this year like there was for a Kendrick Green or a Dan Moore in years past, if you will. So thank you for the question, Ryan, and thank you all for tuning into the Locked On Steelers podcast. I'm your host, Chris Carter. Follow me on Twitter and Instagram at Carter Critiques. Read my work at the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette, post-gazette.com. Find me here on the Locked On Steelers podcast every day, Monday through Friday, breaking down your Pittsburgh Steelers. Back tomorrow with more on your Pittsburgh Steelers right here on the Locked On Steelers podcast.